From the St. Francis Yacht Club in San Francisco, this is the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon, hosted by Ron Young.
Welcome to the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon, live from the virtual grill room of the St. Francis Yacht Club. We hope that you and yours are sheltering in place in a comfortable environment, and we look forward to having you join our yacht club in the beautiful city front and Tinsley locations just as soon as conditions permit. Our speaker and speakers today are notable, very successful sailors, but more than that, contributors to the general game of sailing. Bruce Stone has won the Sailor of the Year twice, and his wife, Nicole Brolt, has won the Sailor of the Year once. She furthermore was Yacht's Man of the Year, the first female to hold that title, once, and Yacht's Woman of the Year 3 times. Together, they've also won the J105 North Americans twice. But there are other great sailors in our yacht club. There are a few who've done as much to support the general game of match racing as leaders of our panel today, Bruce and Nicole. And they've brought with them for our talk a panel of another half a dozen thoughtful umpires, racers, and race organizers as part of California Dreamin. Welcome to the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon, all of you. And Bruce, give us a quick recap of the history of California Dreamin. When did it start? And give us a little bit of the background.
Thank you, Ron, for that kind introduction. Well, today we'll assume everybody listening to this talk is quite familiar with fleet racing and the racing rules of sailing. And we'll focus on how match racing differs and why everyone on this panel is so passionate about it. Most of us feel that match racing makes you the best racer you can be. And I certainly see that in our fleet racing because we position ourselves coming into a lured gate using match race techniques. Our participants in the panel include representatives from the other 2 clubs in the series, San Diego and Long Beach, as well as some umpires, race officials, and we have some of the skippers that are competing this weekend in the St. Francis, which is the first of the 3 club series. It'll be on Saturday, Sunday, the 28th, 29th. We hope that at the end of this talk, you'll be encouraged to come to the race deck and watch the action. We start at 10:23 in the morning on Saturday and also on Sunday. Or you can go to our sister clubs. Long Beach has a phenomenal viewing point on their pier, and San Diego starts their regattas right downtown off the Star of India. So you can watch match racing at all 3 clubs very close up and see everything that's going on. So unlike fleet racing, where maybe 20 boats take off into the distance and a race takes an hour or more, the reason you can watch match racing and understand who's leading is that the action is close to shore and the course is very short. In our case, in J22s, we only have a 1/4 mile from starting line to the windward mark. And an individual match only takes 16 to 18 minutes. In fleet racing, teams only have 1 to 3 races a day, while in match racing, if there's 8 teams competing, we'll have 7 matches. Each skipper will race against the other in a round robin. Now, the scores carry forward to the next day when they do another round robin. And then sometimes there's a knockout where the semifinals and finals take place. When the event is over, the skippers earn world match racing points based on their performance and the grade of the event. International umpire Kirk Brown is on this call. We'll discuss that in more detail. But first, let's have Chris Ray show us some photos and short videos to see what's happening on the water in the pre-start, which is the most critical phase of match racing.
Also, we should thank Chris Ray, who's an extraordinary photographer and every now and then takes time away from world travels to do this great service for us on a pro bono basis.
So Nicole can best address what's going on here, but this is the pre-start where boats are just killing time before they head to the starting line, and they're trying to maintain control of the other boat. There's an umpire boat on the left side of the picture. The umpire is watching. If any skipper feels that he or she's been fouled, they can raise a Y flag and ask for a decision. And the umpire is in position to see whether a foul actually occurred. If they feel a foul occurred, they would raise a colored flag, depending on the color of the boat, either yellow or blue. And that team, sometime after the start and before the finish, has to take a penalty turn. So there's actually 2 umpire boats in the pre-start. One is the actual umpire and the other is a wing who's calling the gap. You see how there's a gap between the bow of the trailing boat and the lead boat. So there's no overlap there, and that's an important part of the call. So these boats are slowing themselves down because they're too early for the start. And Nicole, do you want to go ahead and talk a little bit more about the positioning?
Yeah, so in the early part of this clip, we saw the boats circling, which is sort of a neutral cat and mouse, one trying to get control of the other. And then we saw number 8 manage to tack to starboard and also be able to control number 6 by pinning them. And I'm not exactly sure their proximity to the line and how much time is left, but often being on starboard tack to windward and pinning the other boat is very powerful because they can't tack to port and cross without fouling. So they are kind of stuck and under the control of the other boat.
So here's a starting sequence. One boat entered on port and the other entered on starboard. The port boat couldn't cross over to the other side, so they had to luff up. And the boat on the right also luffed up, but they overran, they went too far. And now they bore off to get below the starting line. So actually the trailing boat that was in trouble has gotten the advantage here, and they're pushing, if you will, the lead boat.
So red is chasing green now, and green is going to try to ditch him on the committee boat. What are you likely to do in this case?
Well, after that initial meet, number 4, like, sort of ran off towards what we call the playground on port. And that's a good, safe place that you can often escape control by jiving onto starboard quickly. And that's essentially what they did. But then they put themselves in trouble again by sailing back towards the line, and red had control of them again.
In California Dreamin, how long are the sequences?
You have a 5-minute start sequence. The boats engage at 4 minutes and they basically play until go. And usually there's like a textbook start usually has an initial meet called a dial up or a dial down or an initial cross. The second phase is usually like this circling where there's neutral and no one really has control yet. And then the third part is one boat decides to lead back to the line, the other is pushing them, and they come off the line in some situation. Sometimes it's neutral, sometimes one boat has the lead, sometimes the other boat has the lead, sometimes it's a control situation.
So does red think they're on time and thinking green's late at this point because they're so far away from each other? Red looks like it's going back to the starting area.
It does look like red felt that they had controlled green for long enough and they could sail back to the line in the lead without having to kill too much. It looks like they're off the line now well in advance after controlling them to the end of the start.
Now, if you look up in the race course at the end of that clip, there were 2 other boats on the race course, and that was the prior group that started. And they're on the course by themselves.
And what about the supporting crew? So typical 4-person crew, 3-person?
In typical J22 world, the boats are sailed with 3 or 4, and that's how they do it in San Diego. But there's certain world sailing guidelines on the weight limits. And so it's so windy in San Francisco, we've decided that you have to sail with 4. And that gives you a very high weight limit of 772 pounds of your crew. And the extra set of hands is really worth it. I mean, if you look at this mark rounding here, you see everybody on the boat is in motion doing something. With just 3 people, it's a lot harder, especially once again with the heavy wind and the current here. So that's how we differ a little bit. And that's actually something that the skippers have to deal with because they recruit different crew for different venues. A skipper might win in San Francisco or San Diego, but then they go to Long Beach and they're on a 37-foot boat. And so they'll recruit some bigger people. And for San Diego, they might get some lighter people. So some of the photos we're going to show you of the teams, you'll actually see the same skipper in some different photos that Chris pulled where they have different crew. So there's Nicole with 3 of her crew, but there's another photo of Nicole with different crew. There's me with my crew. These are very typical skippers we've had over the last few years, and some of whom are on this call. And you see everybody's kitted up in full foul weather gear. So
let's ask a couple of the skippers to talk about the different sailing conditions and what it's like to sail in match racing in the city versus Long Beach versus San Diego. We've got several on the call. Bruce, perhaps you could introduce skippers on the call.
Yeah, well, let's go ahead with Dave. Dave Hood is on the call from Long Beach.
Welcome, Dave. Nice to have you on Wednesday Yachting Luncheon. Talk about sailing in the 3 different venues and how it's different from match racing skipper perspective.
I think that's one of the big pluses about having the CDS is that it is 3 very different venues. So, and there's several different platforms, as Bruce mentioned, the J22s in San Diego and J22s in San Francisco. And then we have our Catalina 37s in Long Beach. in San Francisco, there's typically pretty good breeze, and sometimes during the course of the regatta, it can shift and clock as much as 180 degrees. So down in Long Beach, we enjoy a pretty consistent good breeze most of the time, but we can have light conditions. But I think San Diego really can have the really light conditions, and Chris Nesbitt is online here. He can certainly tell you about that. But I think San Diego can be really light, particularly with, we've sometimes tried to run the CDS down there, I think in December and January, and it can be pretty light conditions. So you have very different conditions between the three, but all three awesome venues for viewing, as you already mentioned. I mean, you can watch right there from the Yacht Club at St. Francis. I've been very close to the rocks more than once over there, so thinking I might be coming into the bar, but elected to go differently. Down in San Diego, it's a great new remodeled restaurant right there in the waterfront where you can watch the racing. San Diego, I've been there in various different conditions, but I think it was the only time I was actually passed by a seagull that was paddling. So it can be really light air conditions in San Diego, and that's has its own challenges. And then here in Long Beach, like I said, we typically enjoy more like a 10 to 15 knots plus or minus 5. And we have pretty good sea state conditions, and we have a great pier venue. So it's a lot of fun to be able to watch here. So
if you were betting your car on the next race, which venue would you personally like to sail in?
Well, it's pretty obvious. Those of us that sail in Long Beach like to sail in Long Beach. We're pretty familiar with the conditions and pretty familiar with the boats. I think Nicole and Bruce, really enjoy San Francisco, and they're very familiar with the conditions and the boats up there. But it's great to have all three of these venues with very competitive sailors in all three places where the distance is not too far apart, and we get a chance to come together and race in these various different conditions and various different platforms. And San Diego, I think Summer's online as well, and they do a great job down there. And Chris is tangled with us in all three places, but he certainly knows the whole San Diego conditions.
I'm going to call him. Marilyn Cassedy is coming up for this event, bringing an all-female crew. Marilyn, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think we'll be on the light side, but I also see such an advantage in the J22 to having 4 bodies instead of 3. So I sail with girls at every event that I can get away with it. The 37s, normally I'll have a bunch of 150-pound crew and 1 or 2 big guys to throw in the middle even. And yeah, there's pros and cons when you think about the strength differences, but even in the 37s, some of it does just come down to timing. You sometimes have to sail smarter when you're a woman and you don't have as much weight to throw around. And I think it creates a good challenge for us. So we expect to be on the lighter side when we come up in a few weeks, but we're excited for it. It's going to be a good time.
Give us some specs. How heavy will the light side be?
I don't expect us to be, I think we'll be between like 580 and 590, just because that's the maximum weight for 4 people with the women's match racing that goes on, and we'll be coming out of the women's match race championship.
So you call that the light side? Yeah,
I know Liz York, who's also, I think, a St. Francis member and coming up for the event, will probably be on the heavier side. So she typically sails the women's events with 3, but she'll also be bringing a 4th to this event. So I'd expect her to be probably close to 700, if not a little bit over it. I don't know. Someone else here might know the weights better than me.
What would be the limit?
772 at St. Francis.
772, right?
Yeah, we've rarely ever had anybody that close to that number. I know Nicole and I looked at that chart a couple of years ago, and there was no specific correlation to how people did to how much weight they had on the boat. It was more that cooperation on board. We'll get back to some of the other skippers that are on here. Let me just give you a really fast, because you asked about the history of the event, and I wanted to get back to that. And it relates a little bit to the whole history of match racing out here. It was something that the St. Francis has hosted in past years as a qualifier for the national championship, but it wasn't regularly done here around the country. So the Championships Committee of U.S. Sailing invited people to compete by resume. And it was difficult for a newcomer to break into the old boys network. And believe me, it was a boys network. Unlike now, where we have more than 50% of our skippers are women out here in these events, it was pretty much of a guys deal. And there weren't clinics or entry-level regattas to foster the skills needed to get up there. nor the points, which Kirk is going to address. And we also had a variety of J24s on San Francisco Bay provided by club members or friends, and they weren't evenly matched. So those were the kind of boats were being used here, and there was no consistent set of events like this. St. Francis bought a fleet of J22s 11 years ago, and that platform was to be used for team racing and match racing. And San Diego bought a fleet of J22s also, and Long Beach already had its fleet of Catalina 37s that they used for very prestigious high-level events. But there still weren't enough match racing events on the West Coast for people to qualify to enter those championship events. So let me hand the platform over to Kirk Brown to explain his vision for solving this problem of how West Coast people could qualify and build their skills. And Summer can talk about that as well, because she's run quite a few clinics in San Diego, both open and women's, and gotten that club engaged in match racing. So Kirk, over to you.
Thanks, Bruce. Thanks, Ron. It's a pleasure to be here at the St. Francis Yacht Club again. I'm an international umpire and retired international judge, and I was a member of the World Sailing International Umpire Subcommittee 15 years ago. And during that time, there were 15 grade 1 events around the world, but U.S. skippers were not getting invited. Grade 1 events need, and Bruce mentioned, 100 skipper ranking points to qualify. And the skippers got ranking points by doing well in grade 3 events and above. But in years past, grade 3 events needed to have 2 international skippers to get that grading. So if you're in the US, you've got to import 2 skippers from Canada to get that kind of grading. If you're in Denmark, 2 skippers drive over the Malmo Bridge for 20 minutes and you've got a grade 3 ranking. So the ranking list was dominated by European skippers, and we didn't have any US skippers in the top 70. So they didn't get any invites to bigger and better events. What's interesting is if you place in the top half of a grade 3 event in 6 grade 3 events over 2 years, you'll be in the top 50 in the ranking points. So we had to come up with some kind of a solution to solve that problem. And it dealt with how you change the rankings for a grade 3 event. I made a submission to World Sailing that we changed the requirements from 2 international skippers to 2 skippers or 3 skippers from more than 500 kilometers away. And the kilometer choice was very intentional. LA to San Francisco, Chicago to Detroit, Detroit to New York. So people could drive to the events and we would have grade 3 events and then pick up the ranking points. That was the impetus behind the submission and the change to the ranking. So when we put that submission in through U.S. Sailing, we then had to get the cooperation of a number of other countries. So I lined up Russia, China, Brazil, Canada, Malaysia, Australia, New Zealand, India, to help us get that submission through. And that has turned into a wildly successful program for California skippers, because we just kind of go back and forth up the I-5 and we can do our 6 events and all of a sudden you're in the top 50 in the ranking points, and then you are very attractive to grade 1 and 2 events. So you'll get invitations to higher ranked events, better events, which gives you even more ranking points and people move up the list. Now, what we find with match racers is that there is a path from smaller events to bigger events, and from bigger events to the really big events like the America's Cup. So top match racers end up as America's Cup skippers. Don Blackholder was a perfect example of that. Superb match racer who made his way to the pinnacle of the sport in the America's Cup. Didn't qualify, but had probably the neatest design I'd ever seen to make that happen with an incredibly talented crew of people who have done a lot of match racing. So by having this California Dreamin event, we have a mid-level match race series that allows our skippers here in California to get the ranking points to then move on to the international stage and play at that level. And who knows where that could lead them.
So Kirk, I want to ask,
Bruce, back to you.
So Kirk, I have a few questions. When did you start sailing? What kind of boat was it? And when did you get into race management and then umpiring?
I started sailing when Richard Nixon was vice president and won my first trophy in a Lido 14 in Lake Arrowhead. I've been a sailor and a match racer all my life, and am still racing our club Solings. I started match racing in the 70s for the Long Beach berth for the Congressional Cup, losing twice in the fifth race to Rod Davis, who went on to win the Congressional Cup. I became involved in umpiring and judging 40 years ago, and have been one of the original umpires starting in 1988, and have umpired 100 World Championship events on 5 continents, including 300 days on the water at the 32nd America's Cup. So I've kind of been around the match racing game for a while.
So Rod and I were both on the same Defender Courageous team years ago, back in '83. Fun to hear his reference made here. He used to joke about winning the Congressional Cup being a big deal to him. The rest of us as well. Yes, Bruce.
Yeah, let's throw it over to Summer Greene and find out how San Diego is approaching this, because we've talked about St. Francis and we've talked about Long Beach, and let's get the San Diego perspective.
Yes, welcome, Summer.
Hi. So match racing here kind of started with Bill Hardesty and Steve Hunt deciding that they wanted to have friendly pickup matches. We really got a great start off, had some help, raised some money, and decided to buy some boats. And we weren't really sure what boats we were going to get, but we had a tryout day where we had J24s and Ultimate 20s and a J22 and a Tom 28 and all these random pairs of boats, and we were sailing them in La Playa. Long story short, we ended up going with the J22, and part of the reason we chose it is match racing requires you for higher ranking events to have boats that are bigger in size. So the J22 is the smallest production boat we could find that meets that minimum standard. And there were a lot of them secondhand on the market, so they were pretty inexpensive. So we started with 6 boats. We bought them all secondhand, bought and delivered to San Diego for less than $15,000 a piece. And we just started throwing match racing. And it's been super successful. We don't have a lot of super highly ranked match racers currently that have come through the program, Chris probably being the exception. But what I think it's really done is it's made our local sailors, we do a lot of clinics. We have at least an annual clinic, usually 2 annual clinics, and it turns a lot of our regular fleet racers into kind of mediocre rules knowledge people and tactical knowledge people into stellar rules and tactical knowledge people. So they're much better sailors when they get out back on, say, their Etchels. We have a huge Etchels fleet or their J105, and they're starting to use that information that they're gaining through our clinic system.
So Bruce, who would you like to answer the question, how does match racing make you a better racer?
Well, I mean, Dusty Durant is on this call. Dusty has been a very successful sailor. Do you want to discuss this, Dusty?
How does match racing make you a better racer?
Makes you comfortable with all the situations that present themselves. Like Bruce said earlier, in fleet racing, when you go on the port tack ley line in fleet racing, it's like no big deal. You know, it makes you numb to some of the close encounters that can happen, I guess. The more you do, the seems like the better you get with all the driving and crew work. That part definitely improves by match racing. You know, coming in the leeward marks last minute, and kites in the water and everything. It seems like that part all gets elevated. And then when you go to do a little fleet racing, the leeward mark's not that big a deal, you know.
Will, do you have any thoughts about that? You're going to be up here skippering.
Yeah, I'm scared. I haven't done this in a while. I think Stotler taught me to doing this. No, but it's you know, I mean, I think it gets a little bit back to the home court advantage thing. I mean, we've all got our field, and San Francisco is certainly a tough one for those of us that come up from Long Beach and sail J22s when we're used to 37s. And then San Diego, where you come from, lighter, shiftier air. It's an eye-opener for sure. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm struggling to get some crew together, but I think I'm good now. So I'm pretty excited about being there, actually.
Gee, Will, we don't really have much current up here in San Francisco.
You know, I just joined the club, and so I get my monthly rag that says The Current on it, and I shudder every time I see that.
So we haven't heard from Chris Nesbitt yet. Chris, how has the California Dreamin Series treated you, and how have you used it to advance your skills and your rankings and so forth?
I mean, I think as Summer and you outlined, Bruce, I mean, I've been very fortunate. I think for me, I came with very, very little experience. I didn't sail as a junior or anything. And so breaking in, getting invited, and then kind of going up the learning curve with guys like Kirk available to answer questions after racing. I think it was a kind of a community effort when you think about it. And all of us on this call have been together now at many, many events. And so the shared knowledge, the learning, your friends go to an away event, they come back and they tell you what they learned. But all in all, no, I've really enjoyed the opportunities that have been presented. I was fortunate. I've been able to go to Florida, Chicago, Detroit. We even went to St. Martin one year. And certainly without the Dreamin Series, we wouldn't have been able to do that, or I wouldn't have been invited or entertained on an application basis. So slowly getting back into it now with this sort of the pandemic subsiding, hopefully, and really looking forward to a fun race weekend. You know, in San Diego's defense, we've definitely bobbed around down there, but equally been to San Francisco. I think Nicole can confirm that we did at least one, if not 2 days, with no wind there. So Long Beach, I think, from a consistency standpoint, you can count on some breeze. The other two venues historically have now more recently trended to a little bit more uncertain. But all in all, huge kudos to the club, all three clubs, and the folks like Summer and yourself who kind of maintain the fleets. I would say, at least from my perspective, that I don't feel like the boats are unequal anymore at all. And I think San Diego even recently has stopped rotating between races and really made the focus on getting more racing in. And I think that that's been beneficial for everyone. I think it's just been wonderful to be a participant and being invited. Looking forward to more fun racing with everybody. So thanks for having me.
Thanks, Bruce. So let's talk about how people get invited to this event. David Stotler of Long Beach is now on the invitation committee, as is Summer Greene and myself. And David has some thoughts about the history and the numbers of people applying and participating. But generally speaking, we initially were trying to get 2 teams from San Diego, 2 teams from Long Beach, 2 teams from St. Francis, and then a few open invitations. What's ended up happening, though, is that we've invited Richmond Yacht Club people, San Francisco Yacht Club people, California Yacht Club people, Balboa and Newport Harbor, King Harbor. So we've had a diversity in clubs. It hasn't just been our 3. And that's been to the benefit of the whole program, actually. Dave, do you want to take it away? You have something to share on screen?
Sure. I guess a little take it back in history. 2011 was our first year, and there's our flyer. We took it back a little bit, gave it a little bit of California flavor, and put it together. And it's been a real pleasure to work with Bruce and Summer over the last number of years to do this. In our case, in Long Beach, Kirk Brown laid the groundwork for us and set the stage and tied our clubs together. So I really launched it. But I've enjoyed working with everyone on the selection side, the calendaring side. And it's really done a lot for our events, and I think for the West Coast and match racing in general. The Congressional Cup, Grade 1 event, World Championship event, World Match Racing Tour event, is in its 56th year, and takes a lot to sustain that. But for a long periods of time, it was a bit of an island. It was filled with the top match racers from around the world, but the pipeline had broken down and choked up a little bit. We had a series of events from the Butler Cup, named for Frank Butler of Catalina Yachts, who donated our 37s, and then leading to a Grade 2 named for Bill Ficker, the America's Cup for back in the 70s, and a resident of Newport Beach and very supportive of match racing in Southern California. And those 3 events created a local ladder at Long Beach, but Butler was in hibernation for a number of years. Ficker Cup wasn't always as strong as it is today. And today it's filled with folks who are actually qualified for Congressional Cup. 2 of the top 2 winners in Ficker Cup will go directly to Congressional Cup. So people travel from around the world, but the developmental side of it really needed a help, and I think California Dreaming was the missing link in making that happen. So really changed things for us. Everybody's mentioned the ranking side of it and the distancing side of it. It really leveled the playing field. I think it also inspired greater match racing across the country. The Grand Slam series on the East Coast arose soon after California Dreamin Series, so we might claim to be the origin of that type. It's a 4 series events, Grade 2 events, from Chicago to Detroit to Sewanaka and Oyster Bay and Oak Cliff and Oyster Bay. And that winner earns a berth at Congressional Cup as well each year. So it's really inspired and strengthened the entire platform, and it makes a Congressional Cup feel a whole lot better as part of a ladder and a developmental opportunity rather than a pinnacle event that sometimes existed just on its own. I think also it's just been great to create the camaraderie between clubs. We're really proud of Will Durant for going up and challenging in San Francisco, challenging in San Diego. Dave Hood's done the same, and it's great to see that happening over the years and the chance to visit each other's club, know each other, see each other. I'm a fleet racer, not a match racer, so I see Bruce and have crewed for Bruce and Nicole in their J105 and love that, and see Summer at big events in Puerto Vallarta or San Diego. And it's just great to be part of that network, make it part of the club network rather than just the outside world of match racing. So as proof of the success there, we first ran in 2011, as we mentioned, and had 4 skippers apply for all 3 events. It is a pretty big challenge to logistically make that happen. So we were happy with that. It was successful. We've gone up and down in the numbers that applied for all 3 events. But as proof of concept, I would say in 2021, we had 13 teams apply for 8 spots at all 3 events. So we were heavily oversubscribed. Really wonderful to see that. We had 4 other teams that wanted to enter 1 or 2 of the events, and we're kind of shut out by those who could commit to all 3. But that level of competition is outstanding. And I think it really speaks well for what the clubs have done here with these events. Very proud of that.
Kirk, one thing you've been doing is training umpires also, and using these extra events for umpires and training to ride along with full umpires, correct?
Certainly that. Every event where I'm involved in umpire selection has a development component involved in it. At California Dreamin events, we have tied those into U.S. Sailing umpire seminars with the idea that if we're not developing umpires, we will then pay to import them. And when we look at the strength of the umpire community globally, California has the strongest umpire community in the entire world. We have more international umpires. The U.S. has more women umpires than any country in the world. So the development component is forefront in all of the match race events that we do. And we've just developed a real powerhouse of umpires on the West Coast.
So Bruce and our others, what other yacht club alliances have existed to support or promote match racing? Are there other teams of clubs in America or in Europe otherwise that have done something like the California Dreamin Series?
Kirk might know more about that than us.
Yeah, there are a series of events in Poland and in France that are somewhat similar, with a series of grade 3 events. Also, Denmark and Sweden have some events that kind of work together, and there are some Russian events between St. Petersburg, Moscow, and Ekaterinburg that feed into their program. So other countries have done and are doing similar kinds of things with the idea of developing better sailors and match racers. Bruce mentioned, and I think Chris Nesbitt also mentioned, that being a match race skipper makes you a better fleet race sailor. I just finished as a judge at the J70 World Championship. There was an incident at the race committee boat that was barging, Rule 18. And the 3 skippers that were involved, none of them had a clear view of what the rule really was and how it applied. Match race skipper would never make that mistake.
So Bruce, who do you admire, and or others on this call, from a race organizing, match race organizing perspective? Who do you think does a great job?
I would say that you have some of the top match racing organizers in the country, certainly, and probably the world on this call. I'm super impressed by all the people who work so hard to put this together. And I'm not a member of one of the 3 clubs. I'm a member at California Yacht Club in Los Angeles, but we've tried to kind of take a page out of all of your books and organize our own much smaller scale series of grade 5 events, but just because we're in a different place in our development than the clubs that have worked so hard to get where you guys are now after 10 years of running this event. So yeah, we pretty much stole your playbook and are looking to our other little smaller match racing programs again and local to Los Angeles clubs to see what we can do to promote the sport in a similar way at a more entry level. So I hope that contributes a little bit to the conversation.
Your club used to host the California Cup. I raced in it many times back
We
then.
still do.
I remember racing in it literally back in the 60s and 70s. So you basically did some pioneering work way back there in match racing. And it's wonderful to see how that game, match racing, has advanced, and to listen to the sort of organizational staff around it. So Bruce, could you describe, or one other of our panelists describe, sort of like your staff to put on an event?
We'll have 5 people on the signal boat because there's timing and flags and all that stuff. And we'll have a lured mark set boat. I usually try to drive that one when I'm not competing in the event because I get an upfront look at the starts, and I'll have 2 people with me schlepping the marks up and down. And then there'll be a windward mark set boat, dropping the marks and babysitting them. So that's 3, 6 people out there plus 5, 11. And then we'll have a bosun and another rib who's out there to do repairs. So that's another person. Then the race office is monitoring the scoring. So all the scoring gets transmitted ashore, and they're keeping track of everything. So up in the race office, they're out there watching the event, but the race office people don't have to be on the water. We do this all with volunteers taking care of everything. So that's the team. By the way, what you asked about other clubs, Oak Cliff certainly has a premier program, phenomenal amount of clinics during the week and also the weekends, and the race program is superb. And they've been training generations now of match racers, so we have to admire that. Don Wilson had a terrific program in Chicago, which we went out to, and you could go there Tuesday and do a clinic, and then Thursday and Friday you could do one grade 3 event, and Saturday and Sunday you do another grade 3 event. So they were really racking up the points in Chicago, and a lot of experience. Like the skipper on Thursday and Friday would then crew for Saturday and Sunday and swap spots with the tactician. It was an amazing cross-fertilization when that was still going on. But when Don pulled out and gave it all to Chicago Yacht Club, it declined rapidly. So it takes somebody there driving it with an excitement about doing it. I got in because we had something called Belvedere Cup in J105s. Previously, I think it had been in a FAR 40 or some other boat. I did terrible the first time, and then I met Nicole, and then we won it, qualified to go to Ficker Cup. So all of a sudden, it's like see one, do one, teach one. All of a sudden, I'm doing Ficker Cup with very little experience, doing okay, and having a great time, and seeing what top race management is all about down in Long Beach. And that inspired me to get involved and say, how come we're not doing more match racing at St. Francis? I found out the U.S. sailing regional person wasn't really promoting it much. And I said, okay, let's start promoting qualifiers and championships. And we've moved our way up at St. Francis to running the Women's National Championship. We run the Open Championship. We run the Nations Cup. We housed 90 people during the Nations Cup and had umpires from all over the world.
Bruce, who can compare, match racing to team racing, and what's great about each and how one makes you better for the other?
I'll flip that one over to Nicole because she just came from the Hinman Masters team racing.
I tell you, every time I team race, I realize how I am a linear thinker because you get often paired off with a member of the other team, and you're kind of doing the boat on boat, and you're like, I'm good at this. I've got this. And then out of nowhere, some bogey comes in and sets a pick or takes you out, and it's really exciting. But the games are similar in that it's one team versus another, and it's usually they're shorter races. It's sort of a sprint, and it's very highly tactical, and you got to have really good boat handling. I find as a match racer, I'm welcome in the team racing realm as long as I'm open to having teammates yell across the water to me. It's a lot of fun. They're also very different in that regard, but I think that team racing people would make great match racers, and match racing people make good team racers. They can broaden their peripheral vision.
Anybody else want to comment on team and match racing, strengths of one or the other?
Well, as I'm training umpires, I remark that match racing is very much like a prize fight. Team racing is more like a gang fight. So the disciplines are somewhat different, but for U.S. sailing certification, you have to have done some team race umpiring and you have to have done some match race umpiring. So there's some cross-pollination between the two disciplines. For an umpire, team racing is very valuable because you have to move very quickly. If you talk about an incident for longer than 3 seconds, 2 more incidents have happened. In match racing, it's all about proper positioning and proper umpire speak, and usually it puts the team race guys to sleep. But it is really good in terms of helping them with proper dialogue and proper positioning, which makes their team race umpiring stronger. And as Nicole said, they're complementary in developing sailors.
There have been those who criticized our game because it's sort of a first world sport. How can match racing help us bring in a broader demographic to sailing?
Well, that's a world sailing issue that they've been struggling with for quite a long time. In order to have a match race, it's really pretty simple. You need 2 boats of fairly even design, a race committee boat, a couple of marks in the water, and an umpire. So on a very low level, it's pretty easy to go ahead and do that. But there needs to be the desire with any given club, and Bruce has certainly talked about that. Long Beach has that, and so does San Diego. Desire that recognizes that match racing will help promote sailing generally throughout the entire yacht club. The Royal New Zealand Yacht Squadron has done a great job in developing their match racers, but the primary reason they're developing match racers is so the young kids will sail with the older adults on the Wednesday night beer can races and keep the older adults out of trouble. And that's been a very successful program in New Zealand. So there needs to be a product champion or a will to be able to bring match racing into your club, and then a commitment in terms of people and assets to be able to put it on. As far as it's not real high to do that, there just needs to be an effort to make it happen.
So let me ask any of the panelists, give me a funny episode in match racing, funny circumstance you might have been involved or you saw.
I crashed right into Dave Perry hard one time, and I still have nightmares about it. We were out practicing, and he was kind enough to go out and do a practice. I can't remember what the regatta. I think it was a Ficker Cup or something. And we would just do the start across the line with, the 1, 2, 3 go. And he came in on port and I came in on starboard, and it was blowing hard in the 37s. And of course I had the rookie crew, and he's dialing down and I'm dialing down, and I thought he was going to go up, and something happened and he yelled something. The next thing I know, I spun the wheel and I saw Dave Perry at the wheel, just like a flag sitting straight out. I thought, oh my God, I just killed Dave Perry. So we ended up punching a hole in the side of boat 9 that was big enough to stick your head through. And unfortunately, it was about 2 days before Ficker Cup, so I got a lot of grief from the boat builder. But he was pretty cool about it, and I was, like I said, pretty scared. And it worked out. I think it made better friends out of us. It still haunts me, though. I got to tell you, that was a tough one.
Anybody got a story? That's a tough act to follow. Anybody else got a fun anecdote? Marilyn, haven't you hit people?
I'm just trying to think of the best time I hit someone. I think I've hit or fouled everyone on this phone call. I'm tired included. So I appreciate that the community is strong enough for us to all get over it.
I think one of the most interesting times is Kurt often asks us to try out new rules. And last time there was a large change in the rules, they were investigating what happens if you're allowed to hit the mark. Your hull can't hit the mark, but say your boom could hit the mark, or your kite or your spin sheet, doesn't matter. And we were in Long Beach one day when someone let their boom out and promptly ran it right down the side of the committee boat, bang, 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 along the stanchions. So we promptly said, well, that rule is going to need some changing.
Hey, Long Beach.
Somebody was taking a series snapshots of us. We were having a tight rounding with a competitor that's not on this call, but it's a really good match racer. We were leading around the windward mark and coming rapidly into the rocks, into the bar. I mentioned it earlier. And I'm sure the people in the bar were expecting us to join them for a drink as we approached the rocks pretty closely. I think Kirk may have been one of the umpires on this. And obviously, We had the other boat bearing down pretty good, and then we called for clearance there, and we were able to take advantage of that position and take the race. But it was pretty exciting as you're approaching those rocks when the breeze is on up in San Francisco. So with the boats bearing down on us, so that was a good one that could have ended differently. And then the other extreme of that I mentioned earlier was we literally were in a race in San Diego, which they race in conditions that we don't even race in Long Beach, who is sometimes extremely light air down in the waterfront area there. And we took off and we were working hard, and we were all on the leeward side of the boat when literally a seagull did land right next to us. And I'm pretty sure he really looked right up at us and then proceeded to paddle out in front of us before it flew away, and we were just totally frustrated with the lack of speed on that one. So a couple funny ones, but we get a lot of close ones in Long Beach when we're operating around the pier. So that can be pretty exciting. I think Harry's was really good, and that was caught on video and so forth.
So, Nicole, you raced in Russia. Talk to us about that adventure and their take on match racing.
They know the game there. I did want to have an opportunity, and this might be a good one, to explain that the California Dreaming plus those three events plus the, maybe one or two qualifiers, and if sailing well, the championships sort of make up my yearly match race calendar. The years that I've done that particular schedule have given me the opportunities to spring off and do events like the Nations Cup in Russia, and the Women's Worlds a couple of times. It's really been amazing and kind of the core of my match racing. And that match racing event in Russia was really fun, and it had a lot of similar characteristics in the venue, right next to a hilly city like San Francisco, and having to adapt to different boats, and they sail a Plateau 25, like the kinds of challenges that we've been able to give sailors really prepared me for that kind of an event.
Yeah, I want to jump in and echo on that, because we talked about how it develops umpires and race management, and I'm extremely appreciative of the club management support, the race management support, the umpires on the water, and I think it's really helped us with West Coast sailors getting an opportunity to sail at some pretty high levels. I think at one point, Long Beach, we had 6 in the top 150 in the world rankings. So it's 6 skippers, and 3 of us are on the call right now too. There was Bill and Dusty and myself and a couple others, Shane Young and the like. So it's really enabled us to have the opportunity. I mean, our particular team was actually on a very good run just before the pandemic, but we were sitting on invites, to world tour events in Montenegro, Slovenia, France, Poland. And then the pandemic came and kind of closed all that down. But we would have never got those kind of invites if we hadn't been able to have the experience leading up to and getting into races and getting into series like CDS and having the opportunity to race against Nicole and Chris and Marilyn. It's been extremely enabling for the sailors as well. And to get a chance, I grew up playing baseball. I didn't really grow up sailing, but to get a chance to actually be on the same playing field with the top sailors in the world, Terry Hutchinson, Dean Barker, Yanni Bernstein and Taylor Camfield and all these, that's just almost unimaginable to have that opportunity. And we've been, like Nicole was saying, I think it's allowed us to not only get on the same water and the same playing field, but to be competitive in those situations.
So Bruce and or others, how would you measure the success of Cal Dreaming?
We look at the strong level of invitations that we received, and people wanting to participate in this is certainly shows that we have a good product to sell and to offer to people. They know when they come here, they're going to get good race management, and at least San Francisco, generally speaking, good weather, good wind, and the others, have all the different characteristics which make it challenging. You got to pick your crew for the venue. And that's what match racing is like all over the world. But, we've actually had team skipper flying in from Hawaii. We've had Chicago. We haven't just been California. We're mainly California. But when we had an extra spot, we have opened it up, and people have jumped at the chance to fly across the country and join our event. And so we've been very happy with that. And we've been getting umpires coming down from Canada and the state of Washington and Oregon to come and do this, where we've had others flying from Florida and elsewhere, so who want to be chief umpires or just regular umpires for this event. So we've had a great cadre of umpires, and we've had PROs come in from outside as well, in addition to our local people. And everybody's using it for their skill development and also for the experience in and of itself without even going anywhere else. It's fun, great weekend.
Well, to echo what Bruce said, I get requests for invitations to California Dreamin from umpires all over the country. They want to come because they know when they come, it will be really good racing, and they'll be able to develop their skills.
So let me open this to anyone. Give me an ambitious goal for California Dreamin.
Well, this leads to a complicated question. I'm working on a long-range plan for the club to get J80s, a little bit bigger, a little bit heavier boat than the J22. If we get a sponsor, we're talking to some folks about that. And we would try to get 14 of them. And then we could accommodate some more skippers and more people per boat, a little bit more robust boat. We carry a spinnaker and higher winds, so forth. So that's on the drawing boards, but we don't have the financing yet. But we're looking into that.
What about an ambitious goal being the winner, that you could see some direct line to the AC from participation in California Dreamin? In other words, what if you developed sailors well enough so that it began to be a credentialed kind of entry for international match racing?
Well, there is a path from California Dreamin directly to the Ficker Cup. The winner of the California Dreamin Series gets an invite to the Ficker Cup. The top 2 skippers in the Ficker Cup get an invitation to the Congressional Cup. And when you look at the winners of the Congressional Cup, most every winner of the America's Cup has a Crimson Blazer.
There's also a track at Long Beach Yacht Club for training the regatta chairs. And both Daves and Kirk and Will Durant can talk about that because they've all worked their way up through the ranks of running the Butler Cup and then running the next ones and the next one, and the next one, ending up running Congressional Cup.
And I think that's an important aspect of why these events exist at our clubs. It creates member engagement, whether it's on the water as a sailor or through umpiring or through race management or through serving breakfast or whatever it is. It connects our members to the sport and what a yacht club is all about. Congressional Cup is extremely proud of having 325 volunteers, which is an amazing number. From a membership of 1,000 people, and I wouldn't hesitate to say that about half of those folks never engaged in sailing, much less racing, and a very, very small percentage of them know the definition of a dial-up or the cause of a penalty, but they know that their club is part of a world-class event and that they're part of it. So I think that has terrific value because in a major club you have people of all interests, and it's easy to get away from some of our core values if people don't experience it themselves. So being developed as an organizer, as a volunteer, as a racer, as a participant is all super valuable to our mission as clubs, to our members, I believe.
Related to that is that the trend in clubs is to have club-owned boats, that people join a club, they don't have to own a boat. By the way, this slideshow is the teams that came for Nations Cup. In case you were wondering, these are teams from all over the world. So what's happening, and that's why the J80 program is of interest to us. The J22 program has caused many young people to join our club. It's been very strong for member development.
Bruce and Nicole, thanks for pulling together such a field of experts on a fascinating subject and a successful program that seems to be growing. Thank you very much for sharing your expertise with the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Ron.
Thanks, Kurt. Will.
Great to see everybody.
Yeah.
See you on the water soon.
This has been a presentation of the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon.